Okay. Okay. Let's see if it'll let me. Yep. I guess you're recording. I guess it won't let me
Yeah.
record on my end.
There's a witch in our works.
Yeah. Hey, I'll tell
That's
you
what
what.
that's what we
I'll
need to do. We need a pawpaw conjure.
I'll have to tell you. I'll have to tell a story about when you ask about how the program went. I'll have to tell you a story because there was some weird stuff that happened when I gave it the second time up at Mountainburg. It was kind
Uh-oh.
of fun.
Okay. Well, we're gonna start on now. Our banter has been fun and is fashionable because it's so unplanned. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to episode 11, Rock Solid, Copper Sheathed, and Witch Proof. I'm joined again today by Justin Miner. Let's go ahead and start. Gather up the kids and the old folks. Shut down the contraptions and dim the lights. Put away your pocket-sized magic lantern shows. Close your eyes and listen. It's time to strike off on the paths less traveled. Here we experience stories from the hills and hollers, the riverbanks, and the brush. It's time to venture into the wild and woolly Ozarks. I'm your native guide and host, Champ Herren. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. It is definitely fall in the Ozarks. The other morning, my thermometer was below 40. And again, it was below 40. I built a fire now 3 nights in a row, had a fire. And it's kind of still kind of early, I think, for a fire. I think that every year, though. But the nights are getting colder. We've been busy with fall farm tasks. We've had three of our beeves butchered, and they're hanging in the locker plant in Fordland right now for us and for some customers. And I'm loading up lambs and taking them to the butcher next week. Butchering's a very fall thing. So check out Herren Dry Creek Farm on Facebook if you want to follow a little more what we're doing, or maybe you want to purchase a critter. The sassafrasses I noticed are turning here. And I love how the sassafras turns color. It's kind of the gray becomes green, and it's like the colors on the inside of the tree. Now, Vance Randolph would say that sassafras, if you burn sassafras wood on your fireplace, the devil dances on your rooftop. Well, that explained maybe some roof problems we've had because I cut a fence row out of it 2 years ago and we burned a cord and a half of it probably. So anyway, we're not holding with that superstition. But be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Leave us a like. Tell us what you think. Tell us how we can do better. Tell us what you enjoyed. If you've got something to share with us or something you think we need to track down, go ahead and let us know. We've been posting on TikTok, Instagram, of course on Facebook as well. And I want to thank all of our new followers, especially those over on TikTok. Instagram is like a desert, so go over there on Instagram and follow the Wild and Woolly Ozarks. You might as well follow it on TikTok too and Facebook. That way you don't ever miss anything. But no, we've made some great connections over on TikTok, and I want to thank all of our TikTok people out there who have been so generous with their love. Today, I want to welcome back Justin Miner. You get, I believe, you're the first two-timer on the WWO. Justin is a cultural anthropologist who is just off of a two programs on Ozark Witchcraft and the origins of Ozark Witchcraft. If you look at episode 10, 9, 8, I don't know. I probably misidentified at the beginning because I've been off for a while. I'm also the guy that doesn't know his email, as some of you may know. Anyway, to put it out there, Justin has been is our two-time guest. He has had a very successful filled the houses, filled them 2 or 3 times. They had to change locations because so many people wanted to hear his very interesting take on Ozark witchcraft. Justin has a podcast called waywardstories.com. He is a father. He is the guy does so much stuff, it's hard to keep track of, really. So, Justin, I want to welcome you back to the Wild and Woolly Ozarks.
I am happy to be back, especially for what we're going to talk about tonight. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think so. I think it will. And I want to kind of outline where we're going with this. As I'm got one computer in my hand here trying to make a teleprompter, but it's so far not that efficient. Oh yeah, I don't have a touch screen. There you go. I wanted to start. We're going to talk about Ozark witchcraft today, in particular the origins of Ozark witchcraft and some things that are specific about it. If you really want to go on a deep dive of Ozark witchcraft, check out Justin. He's going to put a link when we post this for his own lecture, and we'll try to maybe just do a post about that. And then check out that episode on the origins of Ozark witchcraft. It's a long one, and it goes through it, but that's sort of the background of this one. Now we're talking specifically about how to protect yourself in this episode against witches. And I sort of borrowed that opening or the title from the Devil and Daniel Webster, the oration about what would happen if you go to the cemetery in Marshfield, Massachusetts. So those of you who know. But today, when one hears the word witch, it may conjure images of a green-faced Margaret Hamilton commanding her flying monkeys, or perhaps the weird sisters of Shakespeare's Macbeth. It wasn't that far back in history that a belief in malevolent witches and methods to remedy such were commonplace. In our day and age, folks don't generally cast aspersions of using dark arts on another when beset with some difficulty. Yet a century ago, many ills were believed supernatural in origin. Sit back and enjoy a few folk beliefs in keeping with the Halloween season regarding witches and witchmasters and some of our some stuff that we're gonna go through here tonight. So, Justin, why don't you tell us about, you just got done with your lectures last week. Why don't you tell us about that? How did it go? And you said you had something kind of funny happen.
Yeah, it went, first of all, it went amazing. I have been shocked by how much buzz it created and how well it was received. We sold out every ticket at the Fort Smith Museum of History and had to turn people away because the fire marshal has a number of how many people can be in that building. We had a full house for the program I gave at Mountainburg, same program, but at Mountainburg at the Boston Mountain Heritage Society. The feedback was really, really good. I was just surprised by how many people responded to it. But at the giving in Mountainburg, and I think this one, I love this because we were actually in the Boston Mountains, a range of the Ozarks. Down here at the Fort Smith Museum of History, it's the River Valley. It's technically not the Ozarks, even though it is. It's the same settlers, the same, people. But up at Mountainburg, we give this program. I'm in there giving the program. We got the lights down for the PowerPoint presentation and the slides that go along with it. And there's one light. There's all these lights in the ceiling, recessed lighting in the building, of course. And so that light, it's all down. But there's one light that's right above my head that keeps flashing like a strobe light. And one of my friends that had come to watch that night leaned over to Shelley, the head of the museum, and she said, "Has that light ever done that?" And Shelley said to her, "That light has never, ever, 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 ever done that I am aware of." And so I had to go over and actually unscrew the bulb a little bit so that it would quit flashing. And it was the only light out of all the can lights that was doing that. And then we go to leave, and there's this heavy fog on top of the mountain, which is Understand. It's something you would expect, but it was
Yeah.
so eerie. We got some really cool pictures of it. But what made that even more made it interesting, it's what you would expect. So I didn't think anything about it. But Shelly said later, she sent me a message and said, because she came out and looked and she's like, wow, this is crazy. Be careful driving back down the hill. And she texted us later and said, hey, by the time we locked the building, had the lights out, locked the building, and left, the fog was gone. And it was about 10 minutes after we had driven down the hill. So she's like, that fog literally was here just about as long as we gave this program, apparently. And then when you left and went off the mountain, the fog disappeared. I was like, you know, back in 1591, is it Robert Kirk? Yeah, back in 1591, Robert Kirk told the stories of the secret commonwealth, the elves, faun, and fairies, and they supposedly came and drug him away. He supposedly paid for his life for giving up the fae with his life for giving up the fae's secrets. And I'm like, you know, maybe one does not want to tempt the fae with telling their secrets. It's pretty interesting. But to answer your question in my typical long-winded way, it went so well. There's going to be a full article in the Democrat Gazette, I believe, this weekend, the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. I've been on your show now, but then I was also on KUAF a couple of weeks ago, and I'm supposed to be again on Halloween weekend, which is kind of Arkansas's PBS radio, talk radio. So it's been crazy, like the response. So super cool. And thanks for having me, because that helps with that. That gets more people aware of it.
Well, I've listened to our podcast sort of to get ready for this one, and just really, and it's just a wonderful guest to have on, and so we really appreciate you sharing your time and everything with us. So, assuming you're not being like followed by Graham French's ghost or whoever. Yeah.
I know. I got my witch hazel and my incense, man. I'm good. I got to protect the house, right?
Well, one of the things that has been interesting about our collaboration here is that we've both kind of came at the same thing from different viewpoints. Mm-hmm. We view Ozark Witchcraft as this cultural amalgamation of frontier beliefs that just sort of land here, and some of them may take better than the others. It's kind of hard to say. But the more we get into the part of protecting or you're protecting yourself or your family or your house or your livestock or whatever from witches, mm-hmm. you get into how to combat witches. And I kind of maintain sort of a working hypothesis that is the prevention and the combating have a broader cultural array of things. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that that's necessarily true, but we were having an interesting conversation before we got here about pawpaws, and which pawpaw groves in the Ozarks are used, and pawpaw bark involves different things, but that maybe the pawpaw and the papaya had a similar use in other folk magic. And when they thought the pawpaw was the papaya, or there's a cultural transplant issue there. I don't know if that's the right word. You're the cultural anthropologist, but
I think you're close. Like, because I think there's a lot of different words that could work for that, but essentially they're very closely related. So, and because when you get back before European contact, even there's so much trade between the Southern North American indigenous peoples and the actual Central American peoples, it wouldn't surprise me that whatever knowledge existed amongst the indigenous peoples would have kind of transferred over, because the mm-hmm. pawpaw and the papaya are actually very close. They're very, very similar, and they're used in similar ways from what we can tell when it comes to medicinal purposes or just eating them, just enjoying them, because apparently they're a really great fruit.
Well, most of your slaves that would have been landed in the American South from the Gulf of Mexico would have, in some cases, been on different islands from sugar to whatever.
Right.
And in Mexico too. Slavery was legal in Mexico.
Right.
So there's an opportunity to, and I don't know that this is necessarily right, but there's an opportunity to pick up two or three different cultures there and actually kind of blend them before you even get here.
Right.
And
Right.
so I don't know that there's any sure way to track something down until you get, somebody here. This is it. But so let's go through some of these because I think they're a lot of fun. I think we're going to have a good time. And let's, if you were to keep witches out of the house, what would you start with?
Well, I mean, there's several things you can start with, right? Randolph, if we're talking about the Ozarks here, Randolph
Mm-hmm.
talks about there's 3 iron nails formed
Mm-hmm.
in a triangle, driven in outside the doorpost. You also have 3 cedar pegs done in the same manner. You can have a cedar peg that has 3 prongs carved into the end of it or whittled into the end of it that you would put in the path to your house that was supposed to keep witches away. The broomstick across the door. That's one way to do it. The blue front door, painted blue
Blue
front
front door, yeah.
blue ceiling, as we talked about in our last episode. And yeah, that would be your primary ways that we see recorded in Randolph. I'm trying to iron horseshoe above the
Yeah,
door,
the
which Randolph.
horseshoe.
Yeah, he talks about the people assured him it had to be facing up, but if you go all the way back to say New England, it's supposed to
Right,
be facing down, and
right.
it actually that speaks a lot to how this stuff, and this is something about magical modalities. Like this is where magic, as far back as we have recorded history, and I'm sure even before, that's one of the things about magical workings is they exist in this liminal, malleable space where you
Mm-hmm.
kind of make them what you want them to be.
Mm-hmm.
In people that practice any kind of occult things, it's not usually to very specific prescriptions. It's like, hey, you may have a general core concept, like let's just say, for example, the horseshoe. Its its primary thing is it is iron above the door, and we can trace that all the way back to Ireland, Scotland, some of the
Right.
Gaelic tribes where iron's supposed to repel fae and evil spirits and things like that. So by the time you get to the US, it kind of becomes like, well, if you put a horseshoe and you think logically, again, most
Mm-hmm.
of this is what we call sympathetic ideology, sympathetic magic. So if the
Yep.
horseshoe's facing up, it catches the good luck and holds it for you. And then other people say, no, it needs to be facing down because then it pours the luck out on you as you walk under the door. So it becomes almost a preference thing where it's like, oh, I learned it this way through my family. This is the right way. But the Hatfields on the other side of the
Right.
ridge don't care for you as a McCoy anyway, and they like their horseshoe facing up. Thank you very much. Right?
Yeah. Well, it's just very interesting because if you're a blacksmith, in the Middle Ages or maybe even before, you basically develop the reputation as as sort of a alchemist of some point. And
Yeah.
think about it. You're digging this stuff out of the ground. There's earth. You've got a fire and you're pumping air in it and you're quenching it with water. All four types of astrological signs. What are those called? Where you're an air sign or a water sign. Anyway, you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
Those groupings are all present. And if you think about being able to weld steel, I think we talked about last time. I don't even think about it. I just go down the barn, plug it in, switch it on,
Right.
move along. That was that was witchcraft. He had to build a fire. He had to stop. He had to get this magic dust. He had to get all of these things to make steel stick. You have flux. You have everything. So uh, that has a reputation pre-industrial revolution
Oh, yeah.
of
Yeah.
just the blacksmith can just do things and
Hey,
he works in a way and there's a lot. They say prayer. There's chants that they used to say to get the steel, to put a blessing on the steel for like swords and stuff.
Mhm.
That they would, and they were putting something on there, and they were folding it, and it was added to the temper of the steel. I don't know. I don't remember specifically where, but that's how high I regard the blacksmith was in.
Well, you're 100% right, and you bring up a really, really interesting point because this plays into not only magical ideas but religion in general. As far back as we know, recorded history, ritual has been a big part of spirituality,
Mm.
religion, magical workings. And what you're pointing out with the blacksmith, he's taking something that's not much of nothing and turning it into something of great substantial value and
Yeah.
use. He is absolutely some kind of otherworldly magician in a sense, but everything you just said is a ritual. You have to get the fire to the right heat. You have to have the bellows. You have to have the accelerant. You have to do it at the right time, at the right pace, at the right speed. You have to reach the right temperature. You have to quench it just right. You have to hammer it just right. It's all ritual. So he's in there performing rituals in the hot, the dusty, the burning, the smoke. And when he's done, he comes out with a shiny sword, something to protect you against your enemies. Everything about that is archetypal within any kind of spirituality to start with. So it is
Right.
no wonder that whether it be pig iron all the way to anything made out of copper. I mean, here in the North America, indigenous peoples were making copper weapons as far as 7,000 years ago. I just read in the latest American Archaeologist magazine, they've got evidence that they were making really substantial tools and really fine copper plated things out of copper as much as 6,000 years ago.
Breastplates and gorgets
Hmm.
and yeah, up from the copper fields up in Michigan.
And yes, that's like one of the largest natural copper deposits, I believe, in
Mm.
the whole world.
Right.
But if you think about it, it plays exactly or perfectly into what we're talking about tonight, because many of the things you would use for protection are about metal. Whether, like I said, iron, copper was a major thing to protect against any kind of sickness, illness, witchcraft spirits. Silver bullets, the only thing you're going to kill a witch with, supposedly, in some cultures. All of those things come from the alchemist, the blacksmith, right?
Mhm.
And they're all used in protection of the home. So when you place iron above your door, then you're protecting your home, because things that are of maybe nefarious intent in the spiritual realm, whether it be fae who aren't inherently evil. This is again because we're talking about the Ozarks, heavy Celt, Scots Irish
Right.
background. The fae was a big deal. And so that's part of what's informing your thought processes is I got to keep the fae happy. It's not that they were evil, but you didn't want to piss them off. That was kind of the idea, right? You want to fly under the radar. I mean, the idea of the fairy tree. Do you know of anyone that actually has a fairy tree that it was left in the field for that specific purpose? I would be curious to know if you know that.
I
Because
I've never heard of that in the Ozarks, but like I said, there's so much stuff that's fallen off by the time I came along that if it's not really in Randolph's book, or if my granny didn't tell me about it, well, she told me just a
right.
few things, then I have no reference for that.
That's something I don't think we talked about last time, and it merits a mention because this is protection. This is
Mhm.
protection against the witches and the evil spirits. In Celtic lore, you did not cut every tree in your field. You left at least one, and it was as an offering to the Fae because you ticked them off if you took all of the trees out of their
Right.
field. And so you'll see trees in the middle of fields all over the Ozarks, lone giant oak tree that's 150 years old.
Mhm.
And I've often wondered, because there's also just a practicality to cows get hot.
Yeah, they need shade.
Summer, they need shade. So that one tree might have been a practical decision by a farmer, or it could have been there if it's a really large one, 300 years old, because those early settlers were so much closer to their Celtic roots, their Scots Irish heritage. It wouldn't surprise me if some of them weren't fairy.
Well, you'd clean out the easy trees to cut first. A big tree like that's quite an operation with a
Mhm.
crosscut saw and an axe.
No,
You
And I'll
know,
tell you, I've run a crosscut saw before. That's the truth.
yeah, it makes chainsaw look simple. So yeah, I think that so back to what we were looking at, the uh the horseshoe above the door, I think that's almost a universal in or
Yeah.
outside the Ozarks. Like you said, there may be some debate on how it's deployed. Um, another another general one we've mentioned time and time again that Randolph talks about is the near Fort Smith, Arkansas. A fella had placed the entrails of a big horned owl over his door to keep witches away. You know,
Mm-hmm.
as it scares them just like antlers. Or
Antlers are here.
another fella had nailed the testicles of a fox squirrel, or no, the genitals of a male fox squirrel. So that'd be including the testicles above the door. Yeah, that I it is there any? Have you found any cultural parallel on that?
I have not. I've been actually looking for this, and one of the first things you come up with, and I do not understand this, I do not rely on AI for anything, but it
True.
kicks it back immediately. But as I looked for it, the one thing I kept coming to over and over and over again is you don't see it anywhere. You can't find people using entrails to repel witches except really here in Randolph's work. This may be a very subculture specific thing that I've not gotten to the bottom of yet. But I mean, one of the first things that it kicks back, again, I don't rely on AI, but one of the first things it says is historically entrails were not used to repel witches. So it's
Knows what
like
they
I
know.
find I know, right? But I so to that point, I haven't found it yet. Like I have been trying to dig in and find through the resources I have available, which pretty much anyone does. The internet
Sure.
has gotten pretty great. Like if you use Google Scholar, if you want to look at scholarly stuff, go to just type in Google Scholar and it's just a
Right.
different search function that's still Google, but it only pulls back like white papers that people have submitted for master's theses or
Mhm.
PhD doctorates or whatever. Um, I haven't found anything. And I mean, I've even thought about it in terms of like I think we said on the phone earlier. I was like, you can almost once you kind of get that training in cultural anthropology or any kind of sociology that looks at lore, you start to notice that there's like just a small handful of patterns that recur again and again and again, and you can usually figure out why just based off of logic. Again, copper's antimicrobial, cedar doesn't rot easily, so they get used to ward off evil things because you don't want to rot, you don't want to have leprosy, you don't, and there's an easy mental jump. You can understand why they're saying this is like versus like. So we're going to put these together. This is when I'm like, I have no idea. Like it's not showing up anywhere I can find. And logically, tried to think about why entrails to keep away evil spirits. And
I almost
as
think
it stands,
I think that that sounds like something out of voodoo.
it actually does have that vibe, and it may be something that pops up. You know, I know you want to talk about pawpaw tonight, and
Yeah.
that's something that's interesting because we do have pawpaw conjuring incantations, but it literally, we can't take that back to Europe because there is no pawpaw in
Right.
Europe. It literally starts here in the last 500 to 600 years, 400 to 500 years. And the only place we see that in indigenous culture really is they're primarily using it as medicines, not for any kind of magic that we're aware of that's ever been passed down or recorded for us to find publicly. It was primarily used for medicinal purposes.
Hmm.
So there are some things that are maybe newer additions to these traditions. A lot of this stuff we can take back 6,000 years, but a lot of it
Sure.
appears, unless it was just lost, the Library of Alexandria, maybe. But other
Right.
than that,
Right.
we just, it may be, yeah, it may be something that's more recent.
Yeah. Well, so let's let if we one thing that I want to talk about is the a little bit of a departure here. Old timers used to make a net of horsehair called a horsehair sieve and hang it over the window. And the logic of this was that the witch would have to go in and out of each hole in the sieve to before she could reach the people in the household, and it would take all night for her to go back and forth. So she would then exhausted, and there'd be daylight would be there, and there would be no her powers would be wane in the daylight, in the morning light. So Randolph says he saw these, and they were very, very they were like falling apart. Another, have you found any other parallels on the horsehair sieve?
I don't know about a parallel, but we do know that people were making horsehair sieves, for certain as far back as about 500 years ago in Slovenia and Central European countries.
Really?
Yes, and there's even some that were showing up in like Asia Minor and as far away as Japan in sort of the same time frame. What I haven't found yet is what's the oldest recording of, recorded instance of it to maybe sort of get back to the real cultural maybe seed of it. But we know for a fact it was being practiced across Europe, and it came with the Germans to North America specifically. They are the ones that we believe introduced it into the New World. And so it's got a long history. It definitely goes all the way back to Europe and even into Asia, which could tell us it might be extremely ancient, because a lot of those Asian nations, they had very long histories with different kinds of spirituality, and the horse was very important in Asia. I mean, think back to the Mongols, right? Like that's how Genghis Khan, that's how he kind of ruled the roost over there. Like you didn't mess in his hood, right?
Yeah, cavalry.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's very likely it could be even older. I just haven't traced it back that far yet from what I can find.
Yeah. Yeah, cavalry and archery versus huddled in a mass in the middle of a field is when they have spears.
Yeah. I mean, it makes a big difference. It's, you're up there right in the heartland of the Osage Nation, and the way they achieved the enormous power they had for about 200 years in the 16, 17, early 1800s was because the French would give them guns and trade with them, and the Caddo and the Wichita to the south couldn't get guns and horses. They could get horses. The Osage could not get horses. The Osage could get guns, and the Caddo could not.
You can steal horses if you've got guns.
It's a lot easier to get a horse with a gun, and soon they came like, the battleships on the prairie, and no one had a chance. That's how they so it's same idea. Horses, man, I'm surprised there's not more that has to do with horses in our folklore and superstition. And it may be just because we are mountainous and there's not as much other than, draft animals kind of thing. There might not been as much of a use for them because the terrain just being what it was may have just inhibited it to some degree.
If you lived in Shannon County and you were over 10 years old and Shannon County had almost no roads through it to speak of, you owned a horse. Your father'd buy you a horse so you could go to school. Because there's no walking to school down there. It was just, you're going 6, 8 miles. There's no, you could buy a horse for, you can buy some old plug horse for $10 for your kid to ride. And my grandmother rode horseback to high school, junior high, and part of grade school.
And that's really interesting. You make a point because, and I don't know for sure, but I know here, because I've noticed in the Ozarks, when you get north of Springfield, or even Branson, once you start to get into the Missouri section of the Ozarks, you get a lot more of the highlands, and where you can see more flatter expanses. There may be deep ravines, but there's a lot more higher expanses and in ridgebacks. Here, like in, say, in the Boston Mountains where I was last weekend for that talk, or up where if I go hiking up on the Buffalo River, it's not to say there's not high points and flat spots, but that terrain is so, there are places through the Buffalo River that you can't hardly walk through.
Mm-hmm.
It's so rough, and because it's just there's a lot of heavy relief, and it may be because you don't see a ton of horses in our pictures of the Ozarks here in Arkansas. It's not to say they're not there. They absolutely are. But like ubiquitously, like, in large numbers, I wonder if there's some, that's just me going off on a thoughtful tangent. That's an interesting thought, if there was some difference due to terrain, or if there was a difference at all.
Even in Marshfield in the 1890s, where you've got the railroad and you can go to Springfield, all of the professional men, all of the attorneys, all the doctors, all of the all your all the people, it's in the paper who's swapping whose horse with who. All have saddle horses. Every one of them have saddle horses, and
well, it gives you plenty of horsehair to work for your sieves, right?
well, and
That many
the value of horses dropped in like 1892, like by 3/4, where horses you couldn't give them away, and it was just everybody was raising horses. And you know what? There's a saturation point because a horse lives 30 damn years. You'd made it from coast to coast, and now you had some level of, population. So you had all these eastern farms that were, raising mare after mare after mare after mare, and eventually you run out of people to buy them.
Right.
So, anyway, but so it is interesting that we don't see more about the horse, and we just don't find out more about that. There's a lot about diseases, and Randolph even has in the witchcraft chapter some things about saddles, where the bad thing, which is always code for a conjure of some portion of some type, is placed on the automobile that causes to wreck, or on the saddle, which causes them to be thrown or hurt or whatever. But there really isn't beyond that any much of a reference, other than the horses get scared of things.
Yeah. No, that's such a really interesting good point, because a horse, and maybe it was the time frame Randolph was recording this, because you're right, they were kind of much more ubiquitous at that time, because you think about the 1850s, let's say, versus the 1920s or the 1860s, horses are going to be a huge part of your life, as much as, mules or anything else that's there to, the milk. We talk about a lot of these, talking about protecting against witchcraft, protecting against hexes. A lot of what you're protecting against is your livestock, because your livestock is your livelihood.
Well, you're in a cabin. I'm sorry I cut you off, but you're in a cabin and you've got 6 kids, and you have 2 cows, and one of them goes dry. You have a big source of natural fat and protein that is you starve. People starve. My own grandmother talked about, there was a drought there in the teens, I think before World War I, and all 4 cows went dry.
Oh man.
And in the summer, and they lived off of cornmeal and fish for months until something calved.
And if that doesn't show you the importance and why people might be like, because how do you have 4 cows, all 4? You're only 4, 100% of your go. It would not surprise me if one of the first thoughts was, they've been witched.
Well, there just wasn't anything to feed them. There wasn't anything to feed them without buying feed, and they didn't have money to buy feed. And so, but you would think they didn't. I don't think they all went dry at once. I think they went dry over a period of time. But the end result was they had fish 3 meals a day and
Right.
whatever you can find to eat or kill to eat along with it. Um, One of the things that the broom on the threshold, you'd already brought it up, Justin,
Hmm.
and it's a very good point. There's some sometimes the broom and the mop are put in the shape of a cross, whether that is seen as a prophylactic against witches, I don't know. But one of the sources in Appalachia that you and I share, and I'm going to give a plug for it because I think it is a fantastic YouTube video. It's called Signs, Cures, and Witchery, and it's put out by the Elkins Cultural Center in Elkins, West Virginia. And I can't think of the little college that's maybe it's Elkins State College. I think that's what it is
Yeah.
that's there. And they talk to some old timers who were talking about witchcraft and said, if the broom was across the threshold, either, and I think it covers both a witch and a bewitched person, cannot go through the door forward. They have to back in the door instead.
Right.
And I think that's an old belief. I think that's an old belief out of probably
I think
German folk magic.
I think you are correct. And you know what's interesting now, because that's something you find in powwow, as we've been talking about in our last episode in this. But it might be that that comes from Irish folklore, because I found one of the oldest references I've been able to find is there's an Irish folk story that a girl in the 1300s had a witch that came and swept away all of her good fortune off of her porch. And so the idea became that, well, if you can sweep away my good fortune, I can sweep it right back, the bad off as well. And that is supposedly, from what I found, at least one reference, one source that says that may be the origin of that broom across the door. And if that's true, it's an Irish story and it's from the 1300s. So there's possibility there that it might have been Irish, because we do know this too. German powwow, and this is something I think we've both even been digging further into this since we did the last episode. I've been in contact with that Patrick Donmoyer now, who wrote the article that I was using to compare and contrast between Ozark magic and the Pennsylvania powwow. And we know that the Scots Irish, there was a large settlement of them in Pennsylvania with the Pennsylvania Dutch at the same time in the early 18th century, 1700 through about 1780 or 90. And most of them are a lot of our forebears. I know mine goes back nearly that far. And so there's a chance they had that cultural exchange where they're there going, hey, we have a lot of things that are similar, and they're both from Europe. One's Central Europe, one's more Western Europe, but they're still for 1,000 years interchanging in Europe, and then they come here. And so there's a chance that they could have borrowed stuff, because Pennsylvania powwow, it did come from Germany in that kind of Central European region, but it was really developing. The way Don Moyer put it in an email he sent me is he's like, that Pennsylvania area was like the cultural hearth for the Pennsylvania powwow. So anything they were drawing into that belief system at that time frame there would have continued down the Wilderness Road and all the way to the Ozarks eventually, 3 generations later or 4.
Well, almost every Protestant sect, and I'm going to call them sects because there's however many types of Lutherans, however many types of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that are in Pennsylvania, Quakers and Mennonites,
Right.
and all walks of German belief and Germanic belief, and then you have others in there too. But you have an opportunity with the development of powwow magic to draw not just upon German, which I always assumed it was just primarily German folk magic, but to really capture a bunch. And, another thing I always want to point out when we're talking about that, if you put that migration into Pennsylvania in what, 1680?
Yeah.
Is when
Roughly.
is when they start in there. Okay. You go 100 years and there are communities speaking German or speaking Dutch, as it's called, but they're also speaking English at that
Right.
point. A
Yeah.
lot of them are. And your Scots Irish who come in, who are in there, I think that the that accept that as a rule, by the time they left there and started into the Ohio Valley or started along the Appalachian or started across kind of the fish hook into the Ozarks eventually, I think that they did not understand that they were German or had been German. I don't think maybe they understood that they had been Scots Irish or whatever, unless they're the log cabin Swedish, the long rifles German, the ability to the food preservation techniques are all from everywhere. You look at culinarily what they were eating and how they were doing it. And so that cultural identity we call maybe the Scots Irish on the frontier, but it was everybody by that point, because they weren't Irishmen or Scotsmen as we think about them. They were immigrants within Britain. They're the United Kingdom.
Right. I
So,
think that I would make one, not a full counterpoint, but I agree with you that especially the Scots Irish, there was, I think, of a faster maybe blending out of that culture. But I will say, and the only reason I say this is because down here, just west of Fayetteville, we have a place called Historic Cane Hill, and just outside of Cane Hill is Dutch Mills. Dutch Mills' original name was Hermansborg, and they spoke German almost explicitly there. And even during the Civil War, so this is as late as 1861 through 65, we have entire letters that are all written in German. So they did still
wow.
have at least German specifically. And we have Wiedeker Village down here closer to Ozark and Altus. And so there were some very, very German communities here in Arkansas. And maybe, I don't know, there may not have been as much in the Missouri side of the Ozarks, but I can think of at least two here where that was still a part of their heritage. So, like I said, I agree with what you're saying, but I think there may have been, at least for some of these communities,
Mm-hmm.
German specifically, they did hang on to maybe a little more of that because like I
Right.
said, we know they were speaking German in a few of these locations.
It may have to do with the moving. The
Mhm.
ones that moved from Pennsylvania and went down the wagon road and went through the South, probably after 18, probably after maybe even before the American Revolution, they considered
Mhm.
themselves Americans, really, because they really had no connection to any of the colonial ties on the coast. They were
Mhm.
far removed from the king or wherever they immigrated from. They had
Right.
they probably had limited cultural memory of that
Yeah.
because nobody's writing anything down. You have a vast majority of people are illiterate, you know.
Mhm.
So I think that, yeah, they're German, but I think they almost, uh, they may have been German, they may have been speaking German and practicing it, but I almost think they didn't view themselves as German anymore, maybe. And that's
No,
probably a simplification.
I think no, I think that's actually accurate. I think it would be fair to say that they're, Americans now. They're many generations removed, and it's probably no different than we are today in a lot of ways. Like I maybe know some of my heritage. I think they might have been a little closer to it from some of the stuff we do have in documents. But like I think it's a general idea. Is like I'm American now, but this is my ancestry. This is who a
Mm-hmm.
part of my cultural background. Um, and yeah, I think you're right. I just think there was some more German, especially the Scots Irish, though. I agree with you because we don't see a lot of that really showing through, except for
Right.
really in the kind of household superstitions that we've talked about previous.
I also think there's kind of a culling of beliefs over the generations. If something is not readily usable or
Mhm.
doesn't make sense, it gets abandoned. And one of the things that you've already touched on cedar a little bit, the cedar peg, um, but another thing, all of these things, the cedar peg has three prongs. All of these things, anything associated with three blows with a hammer or three nails or whatever. It all has to do with the Trinity, the Father, the Son,
Right.
the Ghost.
Right.
Let's unpack egg trees a little bit here, if you don't mind. First of all, if you have information in the Ozark, well, heck, anywhere for that matter, about an egg tree, and to explain to the listener, the egg tree is usually a cedar because they don't rot. And you find one that's kind of bushy and you prune back all of the little limbs, and then it is covered with blown eggs and they are hung on it. And years after years and years and years, it's just fully covered, and they just keep putting them on there. Now the eggs break and fall victim and they deteriorate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, these egg trees are in the shade of another tree near the house, and they are seen as just a way to keep witches away. But just how it's supposed to work, Randolph never could find out. And he only identified two or three near Pineville and Southwest, and then one near not far from Sulphur Springs, Arkansas. And then there used to be a very fine egg tree at the old Jim Cummins place on Bear Creek in Taney County. So they were going out of vogue long before Randolph ever set foot in the Ozarks. And if you ever keep chickens, you know that you get a real spring flush of eggs, and they're trying to put those eggs up and they're trying to do things with them and preserve them. And so you have a whole lot of shells at once, you know.
Right. I think I think we just I think I just found the origin of the egg tree. I've looked at this and looked for this before.
We've researched this thing on the fly. I mean, we've made two or three breakthroughs before we even started. Go ahead, tell us.
Now, this is interesting. If my computer will quit freezing with these stupid ads on the screen. No, this is really interesting. Let's see where to start here. Much like the Christmas tree, the custom likely came to the United States with German immigrants, entrenching itself among the Pennsylvania Dutch. Although the Easter egg tree is typically a bare-branched tree hung with eggs rather than an evergreen. Across parts of Pennsylvania and Appalachia, Kaufman writes, who is a scholar on Pennsylvania Dutch lore, women considered egg trees a type of good luck charm, especially when it came to fertility. The Easter tree achieved more widespread popularity in 1950s after an American author published an award-winning book called The Egg Tree. Pennsylvania Dutch scholar Alfred Lewis Shoemaker credited the egg tree with a nationwide acceptance overnight of the custom of decorating a tree with colored eggs at Easter. But this specifically, a Pennsylvania Dutch scholar here, this may be a newer article because I did not find this when I first started looking at egg trees a year ago. But it says here specifically it came with Pennsylvania Dutch. It entrenched among the Pennsylvania Dutch, and that might very well explain. It was seen as a sign of good luck. Now, it was mostly linked to fertility, as we think of Easter eggs have always been, kind of linked with fertility. That's a very ancient Central European pre-Christian idea. And so, yeah, it looks like it came with the Pennsylvania Dutch, which fits right in. How interesting.
Yeah, that is terribly interesting because we just hadn't tracked that one really down yet, I guess. Once again, dear listener, if you happen to have information on an egg tree in the Ozarks, send us an email, or it's Wild and Woolly Ozarks at Gmail, or reach out to us on social, or Justin Minor at Hotmail. One of the two of us. Let us know, because I don't think I've ever seen anything In the long lost friend on an egg tree. Have you? Or on an
No,
egg? Or blowing
I
an egg?
didn't. I did not on egg trees specifically, and I have been through like there's only what 182, 189
Yeah.
specific things, and then there's one appendix that was added in I think 1856 or a little later that has another 30 or 40. I've been through them all with a fine-toothed comb because there's many less things in Long Lost Friend than there are in Ozark Magic and Folklore. So
That's
I've been
interesting.
able to go through this very specifically, looking for links to Ozark Magic and Folklore. So I don't remember anything about an egg tree in Long Lost Friend. I
Okay.
would bet you my wallet it's not in there for an egg tree, which is interesting, but that's one of the things to be said about Long Lost Friend too, is there were two or three different modalities, and don't put me on the spot to tell you which ones, but there's at least two that are left out that Holman only really approaches the one sort of angle, which is that house father literature angle, where it's very specifically about
Mm.
a lot about health, a lot about livestock, I mean, that's primarily it. And then you get a little bit of witchcraft repellents in here. You get a little bit about witchcraft, but it's mostly about keeping yourself and your animals healthy. And other things around the house. There's some things in here. It's like how to make a great purple dye, right? So there's
Yeah,
some stuff
how
in
to
here that's,
caulk your windows.
oh,
The
yeah,
one
yeah. There's
and
a
then
few.
the one about how to use asbestos.
hmm Yeah. So there's some stuff in there that's not even magic related, right? And because I think the idea was it was a very early conceptual idea of almost like
Right.
what we might look at as a farmer's almanac. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
you're a homesteader, you have to be self-reliant. Here's a bunch of cool tips and tricks. It was BuzzFeed 1820. Is what
Well,
it
and
was. 15
you
ways to
know,
keep your house warm.
there's just such a it goes back to the guys that they're throwing the dust or the whatever it is on the steel as the guys are folding it. And they're doing that to
Mhm.
say a prayer, and they don't even realize that they're adding a layer of strength and carbonization to it, to
Yeah.
that has a whole other thing. But they're because it was done with, we had a prayer while we were doing that. That's what it was. It's a
Mhm.
but magic as a rule was just so common. And spiritual remedies used to be much more common, and it's kind of sad that
Mhm.
it's not, because I think that that's you're going through something. It's nice to have that that other comfort along with it, particularly if in a community of faith, you know.
Oh, well, and when you get into sociology, you
Mhm.
talk about a lot about, and I don't do like sociology in the realm of the medical, but I've read more than enough studies about how much better patients do if they have a strong faith
Sure.
background, no matter what background.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it's Christian, Muslim,
Right.
Hindi, it doesn't matter. If they have a strong faith background they believe in, they have much better health outcomes from whatever disease or catastrophe they might be facing.
Right. Right. And that's that's very much true. Now, one of the things that Randolph goes into, and we are, just to reiterate, the book Ozark Superstitions or Ozark Magic and Folklore, when we're talking about Randolph, is really what we're talking about here. But if you feel you're being bothered by witches, uh, what can you do, Justin? What are a few things you can do? And for the listener out there, we're on page 286.
Well, I will tell you, one of the things that stood out to me is if you know the name of the witch, you're supposed to call out the witch's name and it should immediately stop the attack on you. The
Mm-hmm.
reason that was interesting to me is because the idea of the true name, anyone's true name, not just God's true name, anyone's true name, so to speak, is an ancient archetypal idea. The ancient Egyptians had a big belief system that was built around you didn't tell anyone your true name. You had a name that was like your stage name. Here's your public name to
Right.
the world, but only mama gets to know what she named you and maybe a few very intimately connected people in your life, because the belief is if you have something's true name, then you have power over it because that name contains the entire essence of the person. And if you think about, say, even Catholicism, if you can get the demon's name,
Right.
then you can have a successful, say, exorcism. That true name is so important. And that's one of the ways to repel a witch. So if you think you know who's a witch in you, all you got to do is call out her name or his name. That's not even fair because it's men and women alike.
Right.
And it might just be able to break that hex that's being put on you.
I've heard it said that that's why Moses asked God in front of the burning bush who he was, because Moses, being raised as an Egyptian, knew if he knew the name of the God, he could control it, or at least have a chance at it.
Right.
Then God gives the great answer, I am what I am.
Yeah. I am that I am. Absolutely. And that's, yeah, no, that's it. That's the idea behind it. And who knows? There's no way to know how that concept originated or even really speculate at it. But we know it's an ancient idea that your name is an intrinsic encapsulation of who you are as a person. So if you know a witch's name, you should be able to break the hex by calling out her name. And there's even an example, and I don't have the page number, but there's one very specific example in Randolph's work
where the woman is being bothered by witches. Little things are going wrong in the household, and she sits back and she calls Peggy McGee.
Yeah.
And it all stops.
Exactly. And I thought this was interesting too. Did we talk about this last time, or did I bring this up elsewhere with someone in just conversation where I talked about Dolly Parton being from Appalachia in the song Jolene?
No.
Okay. This is totally...
I'm always in for a Dolly Parton angle or curve.
Right. This was just a thought that crossed my mind one day. She's from Appalachia. She's from Tennessee. And if you think about the song Jolene, which I should really go and look at just all the lyrics specifically, but she's talking to this woman in the song that's trying to take her man. And that's one of the thoughts in witchcraft, is a woman stealing a man, right? And what does she do? The refrain of the chorus is over and over again, Jolene, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
I cannot help but wonder, and again, sheer postulation, but I wonder if that was in some way influenced by that idea. Because it really kind of fits. It really kind of fits. It's just an interesting thought. She's a very, very Appalachian-based human being, and that her roots are a big part of her. I mean, basically everything, her music and everything else. And again, we keep saying Appalachia or Appalachia, either one, because it's our most immediate forebears to anything magical tradition going on in the Ozarks. I mean, it's one generation, and the next one that was born made the trip to the Ozarks after the Louisiana Purchase. So there's that very direct link. One is darn near the other. Like, there's certain little variations, but one is darn near the other.
I think it's a sign of good songwriting that you were able to put that on there. She left it open for your own interpretation.
Yeah,
I don't know, but what I wouldn't reach out to her publicist, just ask her, does that involve a love charm? Were you inspired? Was there talking about a love charm, or is it just Jolene's that hot? Which is it?
I mean, it's possible. Jolene's a whole name, man. I've known a couple.
One of my favorite songs is on the it was written by Billy Joe Schaefer. It is on the Waylon Jennings Honky Tonk Heroes album. It's Black Rose. And by the time, if you listen to the song very carefully, you don't know if she's like maybe voodoo-ish and has charmed him, or if he has killed everybody to get to her, or what. Because it leaves it, you're like, well, what is this? What actually happened?
Right? Like you said, that's good songwriting right there.
Yeah, it's really good songwriting. Well, we have to reach out to Dolly. If you come across this, we would like to know, is the song Jolene inspired by a love charm? And I see what you mean by the lyrics. It could be.
It kind of fit. Dolly and Champ would love to have you on his show,
Yeah, I'd
by the
love
way.
to have you get on
You're
and
out there.
tell about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another way too, not just have the witch's name or Dolly's name. I bet a witch would listen if you called out Dolly's name too. But other than that, you also had the three highest names in the Bible if you needed to
That's
push
right.
off a hex. You call out Father, Son, the Holy Ghost. When you get into
I
the
thought you was
actual,
talking about Tammy, Loretta, and Dolly. No.
yeah, I mean, hey, they will have you speaking in tongues, that's for sure. But
Oh, so one of my favorite, probably one sentences in Randolph. A woman at Sparta complained that a local witch turned her into a calf and rode her all over the country. Many a morning she would awake all tired out and briar scratched with burrs and beggar's lice in her hair. Finally, one night, the witch forced her into a particularly painful briar patch, and as the thorns tore her flesh, she cried out, "Oh God." Instantly, the witch and the briar patch disappeared, and she found herself out in the fields sitting on a bundle of fodder. I think the degree of lead poisoning that was prevalent in society caused people to do things like that. I honestly think it's lead poisoning because lead was in everything.
there's,
Champ,
that's
Champ Herren's medical theory of the week. There you go, folks.
there's a hey, there is a good possibility. There was a lot of lead. There were a lot of toxic things that we didn't understand yet, and that's very possible. I will say this, the
How many
idea
people, just think about the sheer amount of people who just went nuts. I mean,
yeah,
who were just simpletons or who just went nuts. I think it was they were sealing cans with lead.
there's a real possibility to some degree of that because we do know of instances of ergot poisoning or
Right.
ergot poisoning where people have like the dancing madness, as some people postulate they came from ergot poisoning. But
Well,
I do know,
I was bush hogging and I listened to Joe Rogan yesterday because he had on the physicist and the climate, not the climate, the meteorology professor, and
Mhm.
they were talking about climate. And I wanted to hear what they had to say, and they were talking about that guy brought up the ergot poisoning in the Salem witch trials, or the Salem witch trials may have been motivated by an early frost that caused the wheat to develop the ergot mold after it was harvested.
there's a possibility there because I don't want to use the term necessarily mass hysteria, but
Yeah,
a mass people jumping on board to a social movement. You could say lock maybe
yeah,
maybe a couple of folks did get ergot poisoning and went a little hallucinatory, and maybe that started something, fired off something, and then the people there's a reason that people get called sheeple pretty often. We
yeah,
follow. People follow. And if there's a big social movement happening, it's like get on the bus or get run over by the bus. And listen, if the
right.
bus that's coming is taking out witches, you probably want to be on the bus so you don't get accused of being a
Yeah.
witch, right?
And you want to join in on that so you can get the property of the witches that
Yeah, man.
sold
I
out.
mean, absolutely. You definitely just want to play it on
No
the
matter
safe
we have
side.
to press the guy to death, we'll just, take the
Right.
farm.
Right.
There was a lot of fuckery going along with the whole Salem witch trials, but you know,
Yeah.
you have a whole bunch of people living in the woods scared of everything, and one of them has a LSD trip basically.
Yeah.
No telling
Yeah.
what's going to happen in that little tight knit society.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know that we'll ever know, but I think it's a fun one to play with. And I swear to God, when I was talking about Ozark Witchcraft, I would never bring up the Salem witch trials. It's like my kryptonite because it goes down a whole other deal than I want to play with. But
Right. I
um,
will say, in connection to what we're talking about, though, riding the girl through the fields or whatever, that does go all the way back to Europe, because that's one of the things in the Malleus Maleficarum in Heinrich Kramer's work. That's like one of the, like the FBI today has 10 signs for what makes you a cult, and you've only got to tick 3 boxes to be considered a cult. Well, Heinrich Kramer had the 7 or 8 things you had to be caught doing to be a witch, and you only had to tick 2 or 3 boxes. But one of those boxes was turning people into familiars, so to speak, and then riding them through the sky off to the witches' sabbaths. And it's interesting because socially that sort of makes sense, because if you were going to accuse someone of being a witch, that's going to mean very likely, especially with the prescription that you had to be in a graveyard at a witch's sabbath with Satan, fornicating with the devil, right? Somebody had to see that. So if you were the person trying to accuse that witch and you're like, I saw her fornicating with the devil, someone's going to look at you and go, well, how were you at the graveyard to see her fornicating with the devil? That's a real possibility. And if you were it's basically an out. She turned me into familiar and she flew me through the sky. She rode me to the witch's sabbath, and that's why I saw her at the Sabbath. It's your way to accuse, but have an out for why you were there. Because I know we're going with this crazy logic here, the fact that there ever was a witch's Sabbath to start with.
Well, right.
Society is accepting it, and the accusation is accepting that as a foregone. If you're going to accuse someone of being there, you have to have a reason to be there yourself. So if the witch witches you and rides you there, then you kind of got your CYA, right? Got to cover your.
The one thing that I always go back to and never really makes sense, and I'm also trying to write some fiction where I include some Ozark folk belief in it, is the motivation of the witch. Now, I get it where the witch is stealing milk, or the witch is using her hearthstone to steal flour or meal or money or any of these other things that maybe aren't even really Ozark, but just general witch beliefs. So I get that. I get that because that's need, okay? So you can justify that. But the construct of the evil witch who just wants to screw around with people for the sheer joy of it, and or to hurt people just for the sheer joy of it, that's always the one where I'm like, if you're a witch, you probably don't want to be outwardly that evil, because then you're going to get caught. If you ride your neighbor's daughter to across the countryside, once again, no sexual overtones on any of this riding business, but brooms included. But there's, you do that 3 or 4 nights and somebody's going to kill you. Right. So I never understood that beyond just a tale that is told. I've never understood, the construct of the evil witch who just wants to hurt you. Never really made sense.
I think that there's 2 ways to look at that. What you just said makes total sense, and it is just a tell. No, there's literally no examples whatsoever, proven facts of someone turning a human into a horse and riding them somewhere. We have no examples of that.
However,
witches do.
Listeners, should you be able to do this,
please get in touch.
No. Video it and send it to us.
That works too. That's what I meant. I don't want you to come knock on my door.
No, we're good. I've got a horseshoe up there anyway.
But I will say this, that's one construct, but the idea of a witch who's just doing generally bad things in society, like, whatever, just ticking people off or listen, I grew up in a neighborhood where there was literally an old man on the corner that yelled, "Get off my grass." And there was, and go to the internet right now. How many keyboard warriors are there? How many trolls are out there that just like to pee in other people's Wheaties? Look at serial killers. If these people believed they could harm someone with witchcraft, we don't need to I think we need to remarry the ideas of just what malicious intent is, because we're surrounded. True crime's the #1 selling TV, podcast, because people murder people, because there's a lot of people doing bad things to people. So if you just go back 100, 500, or 1,000 years and you believe you can harm someone magically, there's no reason that there wouldn't be a witch out there who believes and is attempting to hurt people for the sheer pleasure of hurting people, because people still do it today.
I guess I'm a lot more optimistic about humanity than you are.
Yeah, it's a dark world.
Yeah, I guess. One of the, one of the things that I always enjoy when looking through this is if you've got a witch and you need to figure out, because I wrote an article one time, not to toot my own horn, but it was very catchy. It was called A Witch, because that is the construct. You don't know who the witch necessarily is, so you have to kind of figure it out. So there are several things you can do to divine who that witch is. You could place a Bible under various women's beds and see who gets sick. Back in the day when women smoked pipes, you could put a little pawpaw bark in their tobacco and see who got sick. If you put a little, here's another one. If you put a little salt in her chair, once again, returning to salt, she'll stick. Salt seeming to be a general weapon against evil. Let's see, what am I missing, Justin?
I think you've actually got most of it.
The awl.
The awl through a chair. That's what I was about to say.
And a witch will sit on it, and a virtuous woman. Oh, and then if you're in front of the fireplace, Randolph talks one night about an old crone who was warming herself by the fireplace, and other people had gathered in the room, and sparks kept jumping out at the old woman. And she turned with a toothless smile and said, "Fire follows beauty." And everybody was greatly discomforted because they know that sparks always jump towards a witch.
That, what's so funny about that is my mom always used to say smoke follows beauty.
Yeah, smoke
the
follows
campfire or whatever, but that's the same concept. That's very interesting.
Fire
you're right. The sparks could jump at the witch. You could put it all like driven through the bottom of a chair, which he says all, but I don't know why it couldn't be a nail or anything else sharp, a pin.
An iron nail.
Yeah, exactly. But the whole
horseshoe nail.
Yeah. The whole idea being there that witches are, because they're in league with the devil, there's something unnatural about their physicality and they can't be harmed. So if they don't feel the end of the awl or the nail or whatever puncture them, then clearly they're a witch. Even in the witch trials, Salem and otherwise, they had what they called witches' marks. And if they could put a needle into the mole that they called a witch's mark and the witch didn't feel it, being blindfolded and basically sensory deprived, then they would say, oh, it's proof she's a witch. Yeah. Because she didn't feel pain that she should feel. And that's sort of where that idea comes from. Now, the fire jumping towards it, the sparks jumping towards it, you start getting into that realm where a lot of beliefs come from that, even come in child world. Like when you're a kid, there's things like, oh, I saw this. My daughter's 11. I heard her say something recently, and I can't remember specifically what it is, but I was like, the reason it stuck in my head was I'm literally watching a little cutesy little belief system develop, and it's just between friends, nothing spiritual, nothing religious, but just like, oh, when the sticks fall out of the tree, it means such and such. And I'm like, what stuck in my head was like, that sounds so much like different witchcraft and stuff. When this happens, it means this. We humans look for links. We're causative. If something goes bad, something probably caused it to go bad. If something goes well, there's probably something that caused it to go well. And it's just like, think about sports. There's like been very famous superstitious ball players, pitchers that would wear the same underwear until they lost a game or whatever, because I won in that pair of underwear and jock strap, and I ate this dinner before that game. And so they're going to do it every time because of the quote unquote superstition, but that's actually magical ritual. They're doing something in the physical because they believe it'll affect a outcome.
Yeah.
that is not necessarily driven by the physical realm, right? And
But
so
it would
I
be
think
a
a lot of
frustrating
ideas
way
may
to
come from
live.
stuff like that.
Sorry. I just
Oh
said it would
yeah,
be a very frustrating way to
it.
live your
No,
life
no,
like
you're right,
that.
and it's definitely 100%. And it is can be linked to OCD as well, like to a
Yeah.
certain degree. If you get to a certain degree of superstitious where it becomes almost like washing your hands 5 times before
Yeah.
you're able to leave the house, that's definitely in that spectrum of things.
Right.
I think I even read a paper on that at some point. But so that's something that comes into play there, I think. But the idea being, and what's interesting is it's very dangerous for anyone because if you put a Bible under anyone's bed to see if they get sick to find out if they're a witch, odds are at some point they're gonna get sick,
Yeah.
right? It's just like if you go out and do a rain dance, or not even a rain dance, maybe a ritual for rain, you usually are going to do that at the end of the rain, the summer dry spell. Rain's going to come in the next few weeks anyway, because it's time for rain season to start again, for the wet season to start. If you go out and do some kind of a rain ritual and it rains within the next week, it reinforces itself, right? There's a decent odds that that could happen.
Yeah, I like you're the optimist now because I've been dry as a popcorn fart out here for 12 weeks or whatever. We just now have really gotten some rain over the last couple weeks, and we're 10 or 12 inches behind. But yeah, causality goes hand in hand with this, truly. Um, one of the so
Hmm.
if you feel you're being plagued by a witch and you want to use some simple conjure method to in the Ozarks to break a spell, or to maybe even uh, uh, affect a charm or to break a charm, a lot of times this gets put with pawpaws and pawpaw groves. And there's the pawpaw
Hmm.
conjures. So let's go through that a little bit. We don't have to unpack entirely what we found, but just to say there's not another parallel in German, English, Scots Irish, etc., that we've found for the pawpaw conjure.
That would be accurate as far as I can tell. I haven't gone so far. I have not gone back into things I can find about the different beliefs in Europe to see if anyone was pegging those kinds of things into trees for sure. As far as this goes, like the pawpaw conjure, like you're talking about, because obviously they don't have pawpaw trees in Europe, but sometimes there might be sort of an equivalent. One thing they do have in Europe is a juniper tree. And, that's something that shows up a lot is juniper wood used to sage houses, to smoke as incense, to put up a like a juniper cross at the door or on your barn. And here in the US, it was the red cedar typically. It's any kind of cedar, but cedar is so similar to juniper. It was an easy jump. They're like, oh, here's our American juniper. And
Juniper
so that
virginius.
becomes,
Isn't it Juniper
yeah,
Virginicus
I
is the
believe
name of the
it's,
tree. Eastern
yes,
red
it's darn
cedar.
close to that. Yes. And you see that a lot. And I think that is one point I would like to bring out. And I know we're definitely running long, so I'll let you tell me when we need to wrap it up. But I will bring this out about juniper and red cedar. These kinds of things are really interesting because they're things you use to ward off witches, 100%,
Mhm.
like a witch hazel as well. But you'll see this, you'll put up the cross and it'll be made of cedar or witch hazel. You will put the cedar pegs in the door, cedar peg in the path, juniper if you're over in Europe. Copper's one, silver is one as far as metal goes, back to metallurgy again. Every single one of those is something that you can associate with what we call sympathetic ideology,
Mhm.
sympathetic magics. Juniper, well, cedar specifically here in the US, it was used very heavily for warding off witches and keeping away bad spirits. The reason why we believe, again, we don't have a written record from 7,000 years ago, right? We just don't have that. But the idea is they saw, it's just like salt as well.
Mm-hmm.
Salt's a preservative. So the idea is it preserves you against evil. It preserves you in goodness. The juniper, the cedar is the same way. It's not going to rot. People recognized it's strong. It has a long life. It's healthy. It does not rot. It does not attract parasites. People like to build their deck seal boards and all different manners of things with cedar because their termites aren't about it. It repels termites and other pests. And so the idea is, well, rot looks a whole lot like just think about like sicknesses you can see.
Sure.
Right? If you can see skin cancer, you can see leprosy. That's an easy analog for rot in a piece of wood when your house is starting to rot down around you and it needs to be replaced, right?
Or just infections.
So the idea being
just
infections in general, yes.
Yeah.
So it's a really easy analog to make that jump. It's like, okay, well, if I need to put together some kind of ritual or some kind of protecting charm, what am I going to make it out of? Well, let me make it out of the material that is absolutely resistant to disease and to pest and to pesticides. So if I need to ward off witches who I think is giving my animals diseases and pests and pesticides, or not pesticides, but pests and different illnesses, I'm going to use this wood to make the cross. So now I've double covered myself because I've got sympathetic magic. The wood is protective in and of itself, but I've turned it into a cross. So I have the Christian tie-in, which is very heavy in the German powwow, right? So you get that with cedar. You get that, again, with silver and copper, both. Copper is very antimicrobial. It's considered a very pure metal. Silver is a very pure metal. Silver is how you kill a witch, one of the ways to kill a witch, right?
Right.
The idea being, again, and I think this ties back to something you mentioned earlier today before we got on to record with Judas. When he hung himself, one of the things he did was he did it for 30 pieces of silver. So silver's always been associated with the idea of repelling evil.
Or undoing it. Yeah.
Committed or undoing it, exactly. So that's where a lot of those ideas come from. And it just so happens, again, a great analog. Those materials are in and of themselves long-lasting, preservative, and anti-everything that sucks, basically. So you use that to ward off everything that sucks.
Yeah. When you get into these conjures, we back to the pawpaw a minute. So these conjures were basically affected by going and boring a hole in a good-sized pawpaw tree and taking some bit of clothing or some hair and putting it together with some wax, some paper. Maybe you get something with a little blood on it or some fingernails or whatever you're trying to do. I don't really care about that, but you would bind it into something you could jam in a hole, and then you would put a peg behind it and drive it in with 3 blows in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And in West Virginia, I know they do that if they think somebody to apple trees to effect a cure on people or an animal, or to sometimes if they think the apple trees, the orchard's been witched, is the closest parallel I can find for a fruit-bearing, for a fruit-bearing tree used in witchcraft in the same manner. And so, but the pawpaw conjure, now I have looked I fish a lot of streams and did when I was younger, fished a lot of streams. And I've always looked in the pawpaw groves, and I have yet to see any pawpaw conjure. So listeners, if anyone finds a pawpaw conjure, I'd love to take a picture of it, send it to us. Now, don't just go make one up. Well, if you do a good job, I guess we'd use it for a reference. But if you find one, I'm really curious. And I'm really curious if you get down more in your country,
Hmm.
if we find that along the rivers maybe more. If you know, you're in that sort of river bottom area down there, if that
Right.
came in, because there's probably some, at least circumstantial evidence to say that that may have came from maybe there may be a Mexican belief or a Hispanic belief or a Mayan or maybe Afro-Carib belief that this comes from. So you pointed out that the pawpaw is a corruption of papaya because the French thought they had
Mhm.
found papayas. Okay, not a. I pointed out that it's actually probably closer to maybe a mango than a papaya,
Right.
but the seed cavity in it, everything, I can see how they might make the mistake. Um, so and then you have what to do with the seeds. You have the basically the fruit, the skin, and the seeds. And so you found out that papaya seeds are used in magic.
Yes.
So open
Yes.
that up a little bit and let's see where these parallels kind of intersect.
There's not a whole great distance I can go with it because I literally just started digging into that this
Sure.
afternoon after you mentioned it.
Yeah,
And
literally as we
did
started the show.
Yeah, I did find references that the papaya is used in both medicinal and magical ritual, but not, I don't have depth on it yet, exactly how they were using it. But I mean, it brings up a point that almost anything that is, well, really, when you talk about fruits, especially because fruit was super important to ward off scurvy, of
Sure.
one thing, colds, flus, anything like that,
Right.
because of vitamin C deficiencies. When you get into any foods that are really, really important, you're going to find them being used in holistic medicine or some kind of magic ritual.
Right.
That's one reason the pawpaw was so important is when Europeans got here and started making their way westward. I mean, Lewis and Clark, they subsisted for a minute on the pawpaw tree and they
Right.
were like, thank God for this damn tree because we would be toast if it wasn't here right now. They couldn't get food, they couldn't hunt food. They went through a really tough patch, and the pawpaw is how their entire party subsisted. So when you have a food that is that integral to staying alive for people when times get lean and rough, it's going to make its way into your
Right.
spiritual practice one way or another.
Yeah, it's good. Like maize,
Hmm.
you think
Yeah,
of
100%.
corn and it's significant to like our Native American friends. Um, so if you can't figure out who the witch is, and the pawpaw conjure doesn't work, you're going to need to get the witch to appear and show him or herself. And so there's a couple of different ways you can do that. One is the witch ring. And the witch ring consists of going out into the woods and kicking up a bunch of leaves and stuff into a ring, maybe 50 feet across, and then setting fire to it and waiting. And the witch will have to appear in the ring. Now, I don't know what other conjuring or other preparatory things you have to do to affect this, but the witch should appear, and that's when you shoot the witch with a silver bullet. Now, anybody setting the woods on fire in the Ozarks is going to tend to draw onlookers. They're going to tend to draw.
Yeah.
People are like, why in the hell are you setting the woods on fire? Everybody get a rake and a tow sack and a bucket of water. We're going to go fight this thing. So, and there's good reason for that. Your fence posts were made out of wood. Your barns and everything was made out of wood. So a fire getting out,
Right.
particularly in a dry time or in a dry part in winter, could just be a disaster. A barn full of hay goes up, what are you going to feed your cows that winter? So,
Right.
or your other livestock too. So, the witch ring is really, in my opinion, fascinating. It almost sounds medieval. It looks like something out of a grade B horror flick, like a Hammer film or something. Except it'd probably be nude Dracula or nude vampires if it's a Hammer film, but you get my point. So,
Right.
what's your take on the witch ring, Justin?
The main things I could say about that, because I have not researched it specifically for what its origins might be, so to speak. But the things that come readily to mind, like I said earlier, like you see patterns that continue to reemerge in things. And one of the first things that comes to mind, I think you're right. I think there's a reason your brain said that feels very medieval. I think it's because it is, because that's where we see fire associated with witchcraft probably the most. That's when we started burning witches, for one thing, was really the Scottish witch trials and that kind of 1600s range of when we get into that part of the witch craze. That's when witchcraft becomes like a proper anti-religion, where it really gets, basically it's called diabolism, meaning these people worship the devil now. And so it was cool if you were committing that kind of heresy to literally just burn them on the spot. So you see the fire associated with it there, but you also see the fire as a big part of how you identify a witch when you talk about what, like Heinrich Kramer was talking about in the Malleus Maleficarum. It's like, well, they go to these witches' Sabbaths and there's big bonfires. They go out there where the bonfires are and they fornicate with the devil and they, say the Lord's Prayer backwards and renounce Christianity. So there's fire associated with witchcraft as far back as we really have witchcraft as witchcraft proper, quote
Right.
unquote. I suspect it would be connected to that. And also, to maybe take it one step just a little more out into the esoteric, is fire is it's a purification agent. And it would not surprise me if the reason fire is associated with figuring out who the bad seed is to use fire to do it. Because again, fire purifies, it draws out the impurities, it burns out the impurities.
Randolph says they mutter magic phrases, and 1 minute before midnight, they set the ring of brush on fire. The idea is this house somehow forces the witch to appear in the circle. But I wonder and then you shoot them with a silver bullet. I wonder if it forces them in absentia, kind of like when you actually go to kill a witch or shoot a witch.
That's interesting. Yeah,
Because
that's
it's
interesting.
and let's just unpack that here, because the there's multiple sources that talk about this, and we really didn't even get to witches in the dairy, but there's always another episode down the road.
Yeah.
But if you suspect someone is a witch, and you know that they're causing you the problem, you draw a effigy of them and you put their name on it, and you melt you down a silver bullet from a silver dollar that says "In God We Trust" on it, or a 50-cent piece, and you take and load it with a charm, and I've never been able to figure out exactly what's on the charm, and you shoot the effigy. Now, there is some hocus pocus whereby you draw the witch into the effigy, and when you shoot, the bullet hits the witch wherever they actually are. That's, as I understand it, the magical process. And
I
then
think what you oh,
go ahead. No. That's basically it. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think what you have there is, how we mentioned earlier, if you have the true name, you have the essence of the person. When you're putting together an effigy, and like, what did you say? you put the name of the witch
Yep.
on the effigy. So you're taking their name, the essence of the person, and the idea is, like you said, in absentia, you're killing them here, and the desired effect is that they die over there.
Right.
Which Randolph, I believe, doesn't he recount one instance
Well,
where
so
did that
he
claim to have done that?
right. So the two best versions of this that are out there are Lucullus Virgil McWhorter's Settlers of Virginia. It's like chapter 16. It's only like 3 pages, and he recounts a witch master named Roby who's killing witches in the I guess would be Virginia, West Virginia area right now.
Uh-huh.
And then Randolph wrote for Folks Say, and it's in Botkin. If you're a folklorist, if you have a copy of Botkin called Witches and Witch Masters, or Of Witches and Witch Masters, I don't remember which, and he describes the execution of Graham French. That's the most involved Graham French story that there is. And how once they shot Graham French, she fell off a bluff that afternoon and busted open like a rotten apple. So, the silver and the charm being the having the ability to take the bullet to wherever the witch is. And I guess now McWhorter says that you're supposed to see the witch on the board before you shoot. And then,
Visualize it.
well, you're supposed to see her occupy the effigy, and then shoot. So now, if you are successful, you're supposed to have blood on the board. I don't know.
Right?
But so Randolph witnessed a neighbor in Pineville who took an old revolver and loaded up some silver bullets, and I think that's what it said, and shot this effigy with this revolver and the silver bullets of some old woman who was supposedly doing things. That's another reason to get into Randolph's Library of Congress stuff, is you could maybe narrow down and maybe I think we get sometimes a shorter version in this book, and there's maybe a better version out there. So
That's very possible. I think the other thing to mention there too is where you pointed out, you melt down the silver coin to turn into a bullet, but it's got to say "In God We Trust" on it. It's got that
right.
word on there, God. That's back to the sympathetic ideologies. Like this coin, because it had "In God We Trust" on it, is associated with God, the highest good. We're going to use it and its silver purification properties, because it's silver and silver is purifying, to kill. Basically, we're going to kill the cancer with it, right? Which would be like a social cancer. Yeah. So we're going to do it with the best weapons we got. So we need God, we need silver, we need cedar, we need juniper, whatever it is that's purifying, that is the 3 highest names in the Bible have the name of the witch. All of these things, like in archetypal thought, what all of them are is basically the person who feels helpless because things are happening to them that they can't handle, taking control back. And that's what the human mind wants, is cognitive closure. So even if this woman's not a witch, but and this is something that goes in, that's a different rabbit trail, and I won't take us there, but this is in modern thought that has to do with psychology. It has to do with medicine. Like, we're going places today with the power of the mind. And I mean, PhD, people with more degrees than the thermometer are like, yeah, no, there is something to this. If you believe it, if you feel like you have control, like we just mentioned about, if you have a faith background, you will do better in recovery from a surgery. Your belief has a lot of power, and people very well made that sympathetic link a long time ago too. So even if maybe that witch doesn't die, but you see her with a limp, that's a story in Randolph. I saw that witch limping for days. Oh, well, my bullet didn't hit where I wanted it to. She didn't die, but she definitely got hit. You suddenly say, that witch no longer has power over me. And it's the power of your
Right.
own mind, which is what it is it's a psychological, she can't scare me anymore. And maybe you don't understand it that way, that, oh, she's just scaring me because I believe she can hurt me. But the actual practical functionality of it is you feeling like you've regained control can actually help things get better for you. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Right. And I think that that's really a good place to sort of take us home there.
Yeah.
It really is in their head. And I
Well,
don't discount. I tell you what, when you look at these old newspapers and you look at the amount of people who were nuts, who were, you read the coroner's jury verdicts and they're like, they are absolutely stark raving mad. This isn't
mhm,
just me saying they are insane,
right.
you know, and have tried to hurt people or whatever. I really think that some of our maybe, and this is just Champ going out on his little hippie plank here, but I wonder about clothing dyes with mercury,
Yeah.
and I wonder about, food containers, and lead was in everything, and other, just other, things like that. And then you throw in this magical belief system along with it, and the lady who's nuts, who's not well, who lives in the shanty at the edge of town and talks to trees and what have you.
Mhm.
Well, she's got to be evil. She had to be
Right.
one who did something, because
Right.
she's always talking to the devil and he's not there. Nobody's there. It has to be.
Right.
It's just such a slippery slope to get on. And
It is.
we're no different today. We get on our own slippery slopes and ride the way to the bottom.
Yeah. 100%. Well, still waters run deep, as Granny used to say, and the devil lays at the bottom, right?
Yeah.
It's absolutely true. We're on, I mean, we still witch hunt to this day. Our witches have become different social malaises that we go and hunt
Yeah.
down. But they were cognitive closure. Like, if the witch couldn't help you, if it wasn't a witch master, a goomer doctor, someone is going to help you, a power doctor, right?
Mhm.
They will give you answers that you need to get better. But if that doesn't work, and all
Mm.
four cows go dry and the hen
Right.
quits and whatever, then, well, you know what? If that person's a witch and we go and we blame it and pin it on that witch and we put that witch to death or run her out of the community or excommunicate her from the church, we've exorcised our demons. I still got cognitive closure because I was able to give a reason to something I
Mhm.
otherwise had no reason for, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's, like you said, I think in our last interview, it's like you often have just kind of postulated that a witch was the answer for lack of a better answer. I'm not
Yeah.
sure how you worded it, but essentially that.
In lack of a better answer and lack of a
Yeah.
scientific answer. And
Mhm.
that's why I think you see the real decline in in witchcraft after the Civil War, except for the most, remote parts
Mhm.
of the country. I think you just see a real decline. But, so you listen to some of those people on those videos in like that West Virginia, that signs, cures, and witchery video. And I mean, they believe it.
Yeah.
Those people believe it. I mean, there's just no, they're
Yeah.
not just talking the camera, playing up the camera. Those
Right.
older people believe it. And
Yeah.
I just found that wonderful.
Yeah. And I mean, and there still are people too today. Like, there might be people out there right now listening to this that absolutely believe it. And listen, man, if you're out there and you do think you've been witched, the main thing you need to remember is the power over that witch is in your mind.
Mm,
If you can't be hexed unless you let someone get into your head and live rent free, as they say, right? And that's
yeah,
a practice the world over, in shamanism and any other practice the world over, is they only have as much power as you give them. Because
yeah,
that's one of the parts of the program I gave, is about the placebo effect. People can absolutely believe themselves well, and we have scientifically
right.
studied fact of that, but they can also believe themselves to death. We know that for a scientific fact. So it's the power. lies with all of us. So if we're, like you said, trying to find a way to bring it home, tonight was about protecting yourself from witches. That right
Yeah.
there is the way to do it. Knowing that whether you use witch hazel, whether you use cedar, say, or just believe they ain't got no power over me, then they ain't got no power over you.
Yep. Yeah. If you have experienced modern day attack by witches and have used one of these conjure methods, even as just a way to set your own mind right, I'd like to hear about it. Send us an email. I'd like to hear about it because we're not here to judge. We're just trying to figure out this belief system, and not from really a modern standpoint, but from what was there. And sometimes there are traces of cultural remnants, if you will, that appear. And so we'd be interested in looking at that. Justin, I want to thank you for coming on again and talking to us and sharing with us what we've got here. How can people keep track of you? And you've got some other stuff. We will be posting the links to Justin's article and to his talk that he did as it becomes available. We'll put that out. But how can folks follow you, Justin?
Best way to do it is just go to waywardstories.com. Just right there on the landing page has my TikTok, my Instagram, my YouTube for there's a podcast player right on the landing page. So if you wanted to give it a listen and see if you liked it, it's all right there. It's the easiest way to do it. And I'll definitely, I can let you too, like I say, I can send you over a link to, they did do the live stream of the talk that I did at the Fort Smith History Museum. I can send you that link if you want to find a way to share it, because it's not the greatest quality, but it's definitely enough that you can follow it if you're real interested in hearing the program I gave in and of itself, and some of the concomitant conversations it sparked. Like it really engaged people. It was very cool.
Well, I will be happy to put that up, and people can give that a listen. I think this is the last witchcraft episode for this Halloween season. Doesn't mean I won't do one or two out of season as we think of something that we want to share. Justin, as always, glad to have you, man. Welcome. You're welcome anytime. And appreciate you being here on a night after a hard day's work.
This is a great way to wind it down, because trust me, if we hadn't been talking, I would have just been sitting here brooding over a hard day's work.
Yeah, well, we're glad. Happy to help. Happy to help, folks. Be sure to follow Justin on all socials and check him out. If you want to reach out to him, it's justinminer@hotmail.com. If you want to reach out to the Wild and Woolly Ozarks, drop us a line at wildandwoollyozarks@gmail.com. Maybe you have a local mystery, legend, or historical fact that needs plumbed, or maybe you've another wild story to share, something like you heard here tonight, or maybe you just want to tell us something important that's going on in the Ozarks. Anything you want to share, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line. Also, I'm going to make a TikTok about this, but we have planning Halloween night, unless it's raining. Champ, don't do rain. If it's if it's dry, I am going to do a ghost walk at 7, and if time allows, another one right after around the Marshfield Square. So we're going to talk about various things that were there. It's not maybe a woo one, but it's kind of a history lesson, and kind of maybe more macabre than creepy. But we do have a woman that was never buried until later. She laid a corpse upstairs in one of the buildings for years. That'll be a fun story to share. We've got some others, of course. So if you're out there in listener land and you want to traipse down to Marshfield, Missouri on the Halloween night, we'll we'll announce where we're going to meet, but probably if you find me on the square, that's where we are. It's not a big place, folks. We're not talking downtown St. Louis here. So we're excited about that. We've also got another ghost story one coming up. We've got one on cemeteries that we just recorded, and it will be out probably when this one is out. And then I've got another one coming up on the ghosts of Hollister, Missouri. So, got our friend Josh Heston coming over with State of the Ozarks, and he's tracked down a lot of local legends at places in Hollister, including my favorite place to go and eat and get a beer after I fly fish, the Old English Inn. So that'll be a fun one. So be sure to look for that. We'll be announcing, of course, through socials. I want to thank my producer, Kenneth Herren. My media coordinator is Raina Barth. Klein W. Herren is house ichthyologist. Well, until next time, join us again. And boys, if you would, please be good to the tourist. Bye now.